Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm extremely pleased to see again a full room after these 3 days of very intense discussions, full of interesting discussions, exciting exchanges. It is now actually time to take stock and to talk about the main findings and filter out the main messages which would form and should form the legacy of this Gloc conference. Therefore, I welcome you all for this high-level summary session, and it's my distinct pleasure to call on stage the moderator of this high-level summary session, Christian HAUGLIE-HANSSEN. Christian, please.
Thank you, Christian. And welcome to everyone to this final session, the summary session of the Gloc 2023. We're all excited to be here, and we're excited that so many people are still holding on. There's been 3 long days, and we're looking forward to now wrapping up. Coming into this conference, there were more than 500 registered people, and there's still many in the room and present at the conference with so much energy and so many opinions. And what we will try to do today is try to converge an abstract or extract of everything that's been said, and it's been said a lot over these past 3 days. A general observation of the conference is on the relevance of the topic. We will have to address that, and that was also one of the intentions of arranging this, is trying to dive deeper into some of the key elements that we are engaged in our space industry. Going into the conference, we have gone through the high-level panels, high-level lectures, plenaries, GNFs, and technical sessions, and we've had people taking stock of what has been said and the key messages from all these sessions, registering and writing down the important points, what surprised you, what were your disappointments, what was recommended in the discussions, and which actions are we actually discussing within the frame of this conference. We heard description of various trends tied to the urgency of the situation we're in, the severity that our planet is experiencing, and also the magnitude of the challenges, but also the opportunities that we have. I would like to call on stage the participants for this debate, starting off with Jim GRAF, please, Director of Earth Science and at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, over there, please. Then please welcome on stage Barbara Ryan, Executive Director, World Geospatial Industry Council.
All right, you and I are together.
We'll stay at the same together.
Then please, Ole Morten OLSEN, Director, Enterprise Development and Innovation, and also responsible for Earth observation and climate initiatives at the Norwegian Space Agency. And the person we all know well by now, Christian FEICHTINGER, please, Executive Director of the IAF. And finally, GATTI, journalist, SpaceWatch.Global, please. And certainly, Ru Abbas, journalist from the BBC, welcome. Looking into the various topics, we've had substantial help from other members of the IPC team, and I would like to applaud Harry Schickeneck, Günther Schreier, and Stefano Pascali, who's done a tremendous job for putting all of this together. Now, how do we address all these issues? Because a lot of things have been covered over these 3 days. We want to discuss this and break it down into the why, the what, and the how. Why did we choose this format and the topics for this conference? What are the key takeaways? And how are we taking this forward? So, Jim, I'll start with you. Dive right into it. Your reflections on the approach taken for Gloc 2023, and why did we structure it the way we did?
Thank you, Christian. I would say that there are actually two whys that we have to consider. The first one is, why did we have a Gloc dedicated to climate? And the second one is, why did we choose the format that we've got here today? The first one's an easy one. As Dr. Spinrad said, the wolf is in the house, and the wolf is climate change. We can't avoid it. It's upon us, and we have to either mitigate it or adapt to it, but it is going to control us if we don't control it. The number of events that are costing $1 billion or more a year have risen from 3 or 4 up to as many as 18. We can't avoid it anymore. We, as the space industry, make major contributions to understanding the climate change. However, we're not fully acknowledged in the contributions that we're making. So one of the questions is, how are we expressing ourselves to the public? What are we doing in terms of getting our message out? And that was part of this whole plan. Another one is, we have great assets. Are we using the assets appropriately? Should we be redirecting them in a different way? And in doing so, the first thing we have to do is find out, are we going in the right direction? Do we have gaps in where we want to go? And if so, then involve a discussion with our stakeholders to make sure that they understand where these gaps are. So the question might be not why did we have a Gloc devoted to climate, but why didn't we have one before? So we're trying to remedy that, and we've had a great couple of days in great discussion to address many of the issues that I'm talking about. The second why really says, what about the format? This is not a traditional IAC or Gloc format. We decided a couple of things. First of all, we'd have the theater in the round, I call it, where the speakers are standing up, looking at one another, and the audience is engaged and close to us and not sitting across a stage. The second thing the other thing is that we want to leave a legacy from this conference. Too often you go to a conference, you present your paper, you walk away, and nothing else happens. The theme of this is space for climate action. We want the verb, the action here. To do that, we needed to change the format, and we created this summary to share with you some of the things that we have discovered over the last 2 or 3 days, things that we want to share with you. Is it a complete rundown? No, we haven't had a chance to assess everything. But we do intend to capture the key points and make a legacy coming out of this conference that has actions on it, actions on all of us, to go back to our home institutions, to have the dialogue and say, hey, is there something we can do better? So with that, we had the why. Did we have a climate Gloc dedicated to climate? And the other one is, why did we pick this format? So I think we've achieved our goal, and well, we'll wait to see. We'll wait to see what everybody else has to say. So.
Yes, Jim says there have been a lot of details, and obviously we can't refer to everything. But going back to the meeting we had at the ISC in September, that's when we really started discussing. We knew we were having a conference, but we were also starting to discuss the format, the themes, the various plenaries, and the forum. Christian, you're an expert on how to do these things, and you have a lot of reference for the core ISC conference, but also the thematics, the GLEX, the Gloc, and so forth. So your comments, please.
Thank you. And yeah, let me say, you all know the IEF as a very traditional organization that has a huge legacy as the organizer of the International Astronautical Congress. But already several years ago, we have realized that we need to focus also from time to time on specific topics, be it now exploration, be it applications, be it space for emerging countries. And in order for the IEF to really live up to our claim to be the leading global space advocacy organization, we need to tackle topics that are high on the agenda of a global community. And of course, what would be more important these days is to focus on a global topic, a global challenge like climate change. And space has to offer something. So it was very fitting, of course, that we jumped into this. But of course, I also need to mention, if I say IEF, what is the IEF? The IEF is all our members, our 468 members. And we always need the support of these members. And we need to have a member that is taking the initiative and doing this kind of conference with us. And therefore, I'm extremely thankful to the Norwegian Space Agency, to Christian, that you took this up, took the initiative and prepared this together with us, with the help of our committees and the IPC co-chairs. But let me also mention another aspect. The IEF president, Clay Mowry, when he came in, he declared his main points he wants to focus the agenda of the IEF on for the next coming years. And this agenda we call SIS agenda. SIS standing for Sustainability, Investment and Security. And sustainability is, of course, something I think everybody kind of agrees. This is today a very important topic. The IEF has taken really the ambition to foster a future where space-based applications and services help to improve the life for all of us on planet Earth. And what could be a better way to demonstrate our initiative and our intention than organizing a conference around climate change? So all this fit very well together, and we are very pleased that we come so far and that we are now here to take stock of what we have achieved and look into what legacy we can leave.
Thank you, Christian. And I think only the past few weeks we've seen the flooding in Italy and the drought in East Africa. And I think it just pays to the point that this is certainly a relevant issue. Barbara, you have some reflections on this.
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of build on Jim's comment about the approach, because this was absolutely the first conference I've ever gone to where the entire conference had people up on stage, standing up. So not up on a stage up front with all the people in the back. And I have to say, when I first walked into the room, I think I wasn't following our planning conversations close enough, because I walked into the room thinking, oh, this is just the opening ceremony. No, it's all 3 days of the whole conference. And I think you guys took a chance, either Norway or IAF took a chance on that. And I actually think that process, small process change, actually contributed to at least the positive feedback I'm hearing from participants about either more engagement from the audience. So it'll be interesting what people think at the end. But I just think you took a chance. There was an edge starting right out with the opening ceremony with the indigenous sounds performer, and it just put you on edge. And, you know, because I was sitting in the room and I was actually kind of nervous, like, I'm going to have my back to somebody all the time, right? And how's this going to go? And yet it went well. So thanks.
All right, so we agree we have been discussing a broad range of topics, and to dive right into that, I mean, there's a lot of complexity to this. And from the R&D technology and to the communication sessions and the political agenda and policy. And I would like to open with Ole Morten. There have been a lot of technical sessions in parallel. So what are your key takeaways from the technical sessions as you see them?
Yeah, we have had great technical sessions here at the conference. And there's been a bit different than in most other space conferences, so they have been more accessible and more understandable to people outside the space community. And that was one of the objectives of the conference. So we have seen a lot of presentations which present the traditional measurements of climate variables which we do from space, but we have also seen very good presentation about mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Overall, we are riding on a wave with new technology. We are doing new measurements, and the utilizing of the data is increasing day for day. And we also see a miniaturization of satellites, which make it more affordable to do measurements related to climate and space. This wave is not only something which we feel now. We can really see it's increasing year for year. So the wave gets higher, and it's going faster and faster. So we are really on a wave which we should utilize for something. This is a climate conference, so we always have to talk about greenhouse gases. So there have been many presentations related to methane. Methane is a more potent climate gas than CO2, and it's important to measure, and we also need to remove the sources for that. And what we see from the conference is not only the public sector, but also the private sector is really involved in making missions and want to contribute into this common goal to handle this situation. Then about further utilizing the data. So there have been also a lot of presentations related to modeling and how we can use it, not only to use the measurement and information directly, but also do future prediction. So we have seen a lot of very nice presentations where they are using what we call digital twins of the Earth, either on a global scale or a local scale. This is in the beginning, so we are still a lot of work to do. So there's still really a lot of gaps before we really can utilize this as we should do. But there is an ongoing process related to that. So overall, from the technical session, we are on a wave. And as all big wave surfers, we should stay on the wave all the way to the shore.
Yeah, I agree. I think the takeaway from what I've heard is that it is a fast-moving domain as other technology and tech development. There's the boundary between the public-private section, how to finance, and who is actually doing the. I mean, we were challenged by the commercial industry how to move even faster from the government side, which I think is a point. And I was pleased with the intervention from JAXA on artificial intelligence, because that came as a little bit of a surprise to me, you know, how focused they were, and they're actually applying artificial intelligence. Okay, people who know me, they know that I'm focused on the value chain. And on one side, you have the R&D, the tech development. On the other hand, in this format, we are looking at what do we look like outside in? And that's why we have Ru here, a professional journalist from BBC, looking into the Fishbowl. What are your comments so far?
I think having listened and having been a recent guest, if you like, into this world, for me, what has really struck me is as journalists, we are storytellers. And I think that your story is not being told well enough, or you have so many capabilities when we talk about space as a tool. And I feel that that isn't being communicated enough to the outside world, because it is complicated, it's intimidating, it's overwhelming, and there's a lot of numbers involved. And you know, when people look at those graphs that I've seen while I've sat here, you sort of glaze over a bit, but you need a method, a strategy to get that information out in a relatable manner where people can actually understand how it affects them. Because the truth is, we're here talking about things that do affect people outside of the bubble. And I think it's really necessary to develop a strategy to put that word out. And I think that if people started to understand that, because what you are doing here is very inspirational. Your goals are very altruistic, and you want to help. The space community wants to help. And I just think that that needs to be conveyed to the audience so that they can understand how space can help with tackling climate change for everyone on this planet.
And you set the scene, you know, introducing in the first panel, our minister with the blah, 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 setting the stage for the conversation. So how do you think that went?
It was important for me to bring in Greta Thunberg, because she is one of the world's best-known climate change activists. And for me, she is symbolic of the younger generation. The way she came onto the scene as well was quite fascinating, because she captured everyone's imagination. She was at that UN conference shouting at, you know, Trump in the firing line saying, "How dare you?" You know, it was very strong. The messaging was clear. And the media picked up on it, and she represented the younger generation, and she created an urgency. So she stands for a lot of those things that you are trying to accomplish here. I feel that her generation, her messaging should be part of the conversation. So for me, and she also represents people. She's got so many young children on side. She's got a movement going. And the truth is that the movement that she has is going to actually inherit the world 10, 20 years from now. So it's really important to address that, and that's why I brought her in.
Emma, you're a professional journalist, and you also have a space background. Your views on this complex issue?
Well, it's very interesting. We had a session about it, and it was a very interesting, passionate session, because it's a problem that is perceived. So if I can just pick up on what Ruja said, the story is not told well enough. This is, I think, something that we all agree with. But now trying to understand what does really imply for us to tell the story rightly, this is quite complex for us, because this is Ruth's perspective from outside, and we should just accept it and take it in. What we're going to do to tell our stories better. And this is something that came out during the communication conversation. I think just one hint that I had is that there is a huge confusion about simplification, complexity. Somehow we think that if we keep telling the story as it is, but we simplify it, that will be enough. Then the scientists are offended because they don't want to simplify, but this is another cultural issue. Let's stick to the practical problem. It is not a matter of simply simplifying the message. It's a matter of, as Ruth said, to change the angle. Because if we keep telling the story starting from our perspective, from the tool perspective, from the satellite perspective, we will never win. Because, as a matter of fact, the external world doesn't know anything about satellite, and is not really interested in knowing something about satellite. It's interested in knowing about life, about emotions, about inspirations, about dreams, about impact. So this is how we should start to craft our story. So this is for the communication issue. If you want, I can give you another couple of technical key points that I had from the 2 sessions that I moderated. And one was accessibility of data. This seems a huge problem from small local entities that they try to actually tackle everyday climate change issues. There are very few institutions, NASA is one of them, the Norwegian Space Agency is another one, that allow free access to data. And this is the basic for inclusion, for empowerment. People, especially those that they work in those crucial and critical environments, should be able to use the data freely, of course, because some entities like NGOs, they don't have a profit, so they need that. So this was the first point. And the second technical point is the necessity of local asset somehow. Like I saw a fantastic presentation this morning by Catherine Calvin. It was incredible. Huge global data. They show how the world is changing. These are incredibly impactful for the general public, for a general discussion. But then when we speak with small communities that they need to tackle very specific problems, these general global data don't make it. They need cut special local data that can help them to support the diversity of their condition. So I think this is also another very important point, the difference between global and local. And we know that climate change is a global problem, but then it has to be tackled on the local scale. Mm.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we're trying to achieve here is trying to dive in and get concrete. Barbara, you've been on many of these sessions, and what's your take on that? Do you have any concrete examples that are worth mentioning and discussing?
Yeah, we definitely do. And maybe before I get into that, I'd just like to kind of build on what both Ru and Emma had said, because the story is disjointed. There's, when you sit through this whole week, there have been just amazing presentations, energy, intellect. People are just really dedicated to what they're doing. And then how many times did we say astronauts looking back on Earth see an integrated Earth system. They don't see national boundaries. They see so there's this passion and energy that exists when you're outside the Earth. But then when we come back here, it just gets complicated. You know, we've got political boundaries. Our institutions are aligned mostly along those political boundaries. And so all this good work that's getting done is disjointed. It's great, but it's not enough. And so, you know, I think it was Leonardo da Vinci, actually, that said in 1452, or somewhere between 1452 and 1520 or 19 when he died, everything is connected to everything else. So as best I can tell, we spent the next 5 centuries disconnecting everything. Our institutions are disconnected, our governments are disconnected. And so I'm hoping with this climate change, it's time to bring it back together. So did a couple places bring it back together. I think there were calls, we saw great examples out of the atmospheric coordination that's being done. What were the common threads? UN organization for coordination, maybe some standards, national contributions, increasing role of the private sector. That's atmosphere. Maybe we would have some of that in the ocean, but boy, when you get to the land, it all falls apart. Even within a given country, we have trouble getting our institutions to work together. And so I'd actually argue it's more of a people problem than a technical problem, because we should have come out of this week seeing just the amazing technology that exists. So are there some models out there? I think the NIC-FEI model, Norwegian International Climate and Forestry Initiative, is a good model. So then if you started to dissect, well, what is good about it? There was Norwegian leadership, I would argue political commitment. Maybe there was a self-serving nature to that, but it wasn't data for your piece of geography. It was kind of bounded, 30 degrees north, 30 degrees south. That's not where Norway is. There was public sector, private sector collaboration. And yet there are challenges there, because some of the later presentations in the week said, well, we need more money for that. So how do we make it sustainable? So that brings in all the business problem, the business model aspects of making that sustainable. I guess I would argue, while it's targeted on forests, while it's targeted 30 degrees north, 30 degrees south, we need it globally, and not just for forests, but for melting sea ice, or for soil moisture, or for floods, or any of the things that we've talked about. So how do you get to an integrated Earth, terrestrial, I would argue, land right now, we might have it in ocean and atmosphere. How do you get to that integrated terrestrial observing system with all the countries, UN organizations, countries, chipping in on this? And I think if we had that, it would start to build back to what you guys said, is the story's disjointed because we're disjointed. We can, yeah, go ahead.
As an outsider, for me, it's like you all speak a different language, an exclusive language, and you both, and all of you understand how amazing you all are.
Yeah.
But the outside world doesn't
get it. Yeah.
It really doesn't.
Yeah.
The outside world's completely curious.
Yeah.
But you're not communicating that message outward effectively. Or, I mean, there needs to be some form of dialogue with outsiders, journalists, storytellers, even the conversations that I've had with Emma, who is a specialist and insider, and I'm coming with my expertise, she's coming with hers. Those conversations have also, we are brainstorming, we're coming up with ideas ourselves for things that we feel we could do to help.
Yeah, we've talked about this in the program committee, the excitement that is generated around manned spaceflight and exploration, which is truly amazing with James Webb and people flying into space. Is that taking too much room from the general communication of what we're talking about in this conference, maybe?
No, I don't think so in that sense. I mean, like, there are some topics that are extremely interesting, like the James Webb, for example. So that's not something that I would say is taking too much room. I mean, I think the idea of finding a common ground of communication, it does not exclude the topic. It doesn't say, okay, this should not be tackled. Did I understood your question correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
You talked about business models and public-private partnerships, or can you elaborate a little more?
Yeah, I would like to come back to that, just to maybe close up that last conversation, because honestly, you guys, of course, can everybody use more money? Yeah, but I don't actually see it as a money problem. When you think about the money that is being invested by our own national governments globally for development efforts, now either you in Norway have done a better job telling the story just around NICFI, but maybe I think some of these other parameters, topically focused, geographically focused, are key elements. I think all of our countries could do a better job of that. Harry talks a lot about just the private capital or the carbon market money that's out there. We're not leveraging that. We always are just kind of looking for the same pot to fund this effort. And then specifically on the business model, while we talk about free and open data, it's not free. Governments have spent billions of dollars building and launching these satellites. Not just to build and launch satellites, to get the data that comes out of those. And so at least the argument in the United States with Landsat is, how could you possibly charge for data after you've just spent billions of dollars building and launching these satellites to produce data? So the public sector, if it was paid with by taxpayer money, absolutely should have access to all of that information. On the commercial side, while they have a different business model, I think you're going to start to see a move away from data being the currency to products and services. And I think we're in an era of, 10, 15 years where we're still caught up in this data thing, which is a barrier to building NICFI out more globally or doing a more integrated surface. So we gotta spend more time on the business model for sure.
And you heard also the minister, he was addressing that issue that Norway, with all the praise for NICFI, there's no intention on carrying this alone going forward. Ole Morten, you've been on the inside of the NICFI as it came up. Can you comment on a little bit elaboration on how this came about?
Yes, so we have this rainforest fund in Norway. So that was started, I think it's 10, 15 years ago. And that gives money to the countries which stops cutting down the rainforest. So that's the way it works. And from the Norwegian government, it was important to get information about what is cut down and what is protected, and something which you could trust and was neutral, and so he was not using local people or organization which went into the country to check it. So then space data was the solution. And it was selected to have high-resolution data that has also good things related to Africa and countries which are not that developed as we are. So it's possible also to use the data just to go in and count trees. So it has a resolution so you can physically count trees. So in some ways also democratizing the data. So you don't need to be an expert to use the data. You can use it directly with your common knowledge. You can take the data into use.
Okay, so from counting individual trees, Jim, stepping one step back, what are your takeaways? What have we been talking about?
I'd say it's a very exciting couple of days. I had a whole long list of takeaways, and it was really hard to figure out which ones we would talk about. I mean, in Rue's plenary, the thing that came out, and you're emphasizing again now, is we live in a space bubble. We are not interacting properly with others. And boy, I didn't have a clue. So that really helps us.
I'm glad to be of service.
And I think Emma hit a beautiful point. And she was talking about getting the data locally. We spend so much time creating the data, putting it into databases, providing some processing, and we think our job is done. It's not done. It's not done till we actually get some action at the local level. And that was a real eye-opener for me. Harry put it significantly. He said, you've got a cable running down the street, and you got that last kilometer to get to your house. And that's the hard part. And we have to recognize, we in the space industry, that if we want to really make our data useful, we have to help the local population absorb the information. And that was a real shock. And then the question is, who's responsible for that? Is that the agencies, or is that the space agencies, or is it the other agencies that the space agency work with? Somehow we have to find a way of making that link and get that information into the people that actually have to use it. So that was the second major takeaway. I will say that I had a really a very uplifting experience yesterday in the plenary system that talked about the water cycle. We had the earth science leads, and they were talking about an international program that's tracking the water cycle and how so many different countries and agencies are contributing to that. Looking at the water storage underground, looking at it above ground, looking at the moisture in the atmosphere. For the first time, we're going to be able to start tracking fresh water around the world, which is so vital to all of us. And it would not happen if it wasn't for all of the agencies coming together, pooling their resources, sharing the data, making the data open, honest, open source data, open source software, so that investigators can really start understanding the water cycle for the first time. So that was really, to me, uplifting. The last one I'll come back to, and that is the methane plenary that we had. It was very interesting to see the private sector coming in so strongly, the commercial sector, in performing the critical measurements to following methane. They're not the only ones, the public sector is doing that too, but they're leading the way. And they're working with other commercial entities, the producers. So you've got commercial entities in space working with commercial entities on the ground to try to eliminate the fugitive methane emissions. And it's working. We are actually able to show to producers that where they're losing a certain amount of their product, and they're coming in. They're motivated for profit. They certainly don't want to be seen as non-green, so they're coming in and working that. They're actually changing what they're doing. And methane produces, what, 1/3 of the greenhouse gas warming that we have going on now. This is significant. We could be, in the next 20 years or so, this is what came out from the plenary, we could in fact be eliminating the methane that's contributing to greenhouse gases. That's very significant. So.
Yeah, so this is really concrete, and we can see that taking action will actually have a result in terms of the decay and everything. And then it becomes very technical. So how does this resonate in terms of the communication we're trying to achieve? I mean, we're lacking something getting outside the bubble.
Well, I think there are two different points. What Jim says is very interesting, because this kind of like gap between the observation and the application is something that I sensed in several panels and also in several of the agencies and scientists that we interviewed. And I know that the States are a bit ahead of us, but something that surprised me is how, especially on the European setting, we are still in a sort of initial phase of this translation from observation to application. Like, we had this kind of infancy when we were like collecting the observation, we have them, that we have so many, and now we have to translate them into something tangible. And something about who is the responsibility. That was also a kind of lingering question. Who should take lead? Should be us, should be agencies, should be governments? And I think at this point, if we want to lead, then we should lead. Like, we should stop asking who should do it. We do have the tools, we have the observations, we have the background. Let's do it. Let's catch momentum. Let's start planning for the next 10 years, 5 years, I think, because we are starting to have a bit of rush, but do it. Question about the communication, you asked me. I think something interesting, if I can just shift a bit, is something that Camille mentioned during the communication session about social media and this polarization, right, which was also mentioned during your plenary almost immediately, which in a sort of way testify how the business is permeable. No, we're not, we're in a bubble, but we're not completely in a bubble. We're hearing inputs and we're discussing them. So what Camille mentioned, it was like, the question was like, are social media polarizing? And correctly so, she said, yes, they are, of course. But if I'm allowed to elaborate a bit on this concept, so social media, there is a lot of low-frequency noise, if we want to use the same metaphor, okay? A lot of like easy digestible stuff that gets out on the general press. And people love it, of course, because it's easy digestible. But if the only counterpart is this extremely dense, self-absorbed communication that we create, that obviously people will carry on going towards the easy material, the easy subject, this low-frequency noise. So we do have to offer something in the middle. And why we have to do it is because it's also our responsibility. Yes, we are space agencies, but we are part of a cultural global endeavor. We're part of this. We cannot just say, oh yes, people love it. People love this kind of like, easy digestible TikTok. It's not our fault. Yes, of course. Children love marshmallows, but we don't feed only marshmallows to kids, right? It would be wrong. So it's our job to provide something that they can enjoy and they can digest. And obviously also comes as a benefit for us because we do want to push our message out.
I think in 24-hour news, which is what I work in, we are competing against social media to a great degree with the information that's put out, the accuracy of the information as well. And our audiences are very time-pressed. That's another thing that is challenging in terms of getting their attention. So if we cover a story, we have to actually keep it quite succinct, but we always complement it with an online article where we say, if you want to know more, you can click on our website and go and read more and get more detail. But initially, sadly, the attention spans have become quite short. Yeah. And that's why these sort of platforms...
What is the attention span? 7 seconds?
I haven't done any sort of detailed study.
It's not very long.
I'll let you
very low.
find out.
Very low.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're talking about concrete elements. Barbara, we had a great presentation from Dr. Spinrad from NOAA last morning, and we're following a lot of issues here, from reversing climate change for one thing, creating resilience, which was an important part of his presentation, but also adapting to the changes. Where are we going with this? How are we going forward, in your opinion?
Yeah. Honestly, you guys, I think that's going to be really hard, because if you do believe, as I do, that it's not technical issues, it's people issues that have got to get together, then we heard a number of different times, and maybe it was out of the communications panel, I can't quite remember, you've got to meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. And so how do we start getting within our own governments, those federal agencies working together? We saw wonderful displays of platforms that are delivering data, but everybody's got their own. So we can't even kind of get together to coordinate our own platforms. Okay, one award was given but for ESA, NASA, and JAXA this week, but okay, that's one.
Yeah, but we have to celebrate those victories, right?
We do have to celebrate those. But I'm an eternal optimist, let's be honest here, but what I worry about is that we stand behind those victories. We use those victories as, okay, check, got it, I don't have to do more. But just even on the public-private collaboration, you don't know how many times this week I've heard public sector say, well, I don't quite trust the private sector data. I've heard the private sector operators say, well, I got to go to Europe to get approval by them. I got to go to the US to get approval by them. I've got to go there. So does that call for some more international governance on data quality and data validation? We're still bound by our political boundaries and differences and institutions. So how do we start to break it down?
Yeah, I mean, we keep laughing at the flat earthers, and then we have communities within the space community that don't even trust each other's data. So, Jim, any comments on that?
I think we have some work to do.
Yeah, that was a curveball.
Yeah. No, I think that we need to find a way of connecting, make sure that the data that we're providing is easily digestible and usable by the locals. And that's all of the space agencies. If we don't do that, then we're making it so much more difficult for them. And I think that's a message that we have to take back. So.
You were talking about the gaps, the last mile.
Yeah.
and it's been a lot of talk about the products and services, and obviously there's a lot of good data available, but do we have the tools we need? I mean, do we have enough data? Are we applying them in the right direction?
Well, it's a lot in that question. I would say that we have a lot of data. Do we have all the critical variables? No. There's probably more that we need out there. The other thing is that the value comes not just from an instantaneous measurement. When we look at critical variables like sea level rise, we don't get a snapshot in time. We want to look at what's happening over the last 20 years. So there's a long-term commitment that has to be made by the space agencies to make these variables measured over that long period. That's a hard investment. That's a very difficult investment. And yet it's critical if we want to move from weather forecasting to climate forecasting. That's the difference. Weather is short-term, but we have to have a very long-term vision when we start looking at the climate itself. So it's critical that we create these time series.
Yeah, so it's a multidimensional. It's from small scale to global, and it's from short-term to long-term. Yeah. So Ole Morten, any reflections on this? How to approach that?
Yeah, so I think we are, until now, we have mostly been measuring what's going on in the past. And now we are starting to get as much data over time, and also we are getting so much data that we cover the whole globe. That means it's possible to feed it into models. As Jim mentioned, we have been doing for an American weather forecast for the last decades. And I think that's also give us some possibility we really should use. It will give us the possibility to do predictions. And predictions, then we can test out how we will mitigate and do adaptation for climate change, and do this in the models on the computer instead of testing it in the real world. And I think that's also important if you want to solve these issues, that we should select the tools and the mitigation which really works, and we should have a way to test it before we put it into action.
In the long term, we're looking at the next generation, Christian. We've had a next-gen session trying to assess, are we doing well? Can we do better? And we're trying to engage the next generation, and they are demanding to be part of the process, to be part of the decisions. How do you reflect on that within the scope of the ISC and the various conferences that we're trying to make going forward?
Yeah, the IF has created some years ago this term of 3G diversity, 3G standing for geography, gender, and generation. And it is the declared aim and the mission of the IF to engage more and more next generation representatives, bring them together with the senior experts, give them room within our events in order to express what is important to them and to connect with the senior people. Now, the question, of course, is, did we really achieve this? Looking at the statistics of this conference, we've around 600 participants. The next generation part of it, and we call next generation students and young professionals below 35, was 25%. This is somehow lower than we have usually in our Congress, where we are reaching some 40, 45% even. But still, I think in terms of registrations, the next generation is at least with 1/4 of the people covered here. We tried, as we had in previous conferences also, to dedicate a portion of the program to the next generation. And we've called it the Wednesday afternoon, the next generation plenaries. And the idea was to bring together the next generation representatives with the senior representatives and have a controversial intergenerational discussion. It was somehow difficult, honestly, and not difficult to get the young generation into these panels. They were all kind of enthusiastic to jump in. But when you then invite heads of agencies and senior representatives, and you tell them, we would like to invite you as a speaker, and you will be speaking on the next generation panel, their enthusiasm immediately drops. And that is something I think we need to look critically at that, because I think at the end it was almost difficult really to find the prominent senior speakers that go into this discussion with the next generation. So we had, of course, perfect speakers, but they were just out of their next generation age, I would say, to engage with the next generation. So what we did not achieve, I think, was a controversial intergenerational exchange. Of course, there were really relevant things discussed there, but I think here we need to work more, we need to be better, and we need to appeal also to our senior leaders to be ready, not only to be happy to be in the top level, whatever plenaries, but also go in these next generation plenaries and take up the discussion with the next generation.
Ru, you're nodding here, and we've been talking about the inspirational aspect of
yes,
this, and
exactly.
also the importance of STEM and education. So,
I was just recalling during my plenary Susie Perez-Quinn from NASA, who said that inspiration is necessary, and I think that for young children, space and everything it stands for is all about inspiration, and I think that we need to create that engagement, and they are so. I mean, now, like at the age 8, I think already, so many children in the sphere of my life sort of are very aware, they're very worried about the climate that they're going to inherit, what the world's going to be like, how long they'll live. I mean, I even know of cases of depression amongst children, anxiety because of this, and I think that we need to give them reassurance, because at the moment it's all very scary news, and I'm guilty of that, we do it all the time, you know. The planet is overheating, we're all going to die, but you know, no one's really bringing solutions to them, and to create that engagement with them, as you said, Christian, I think is really important, and it would be great to get inspirational senior figures in to that sort of conversation to create that engagement.
Yeah. Emma.
Yeah, I think what Christian just said is very important feedback, because if we keep trying to speak about the new generation and the importance of the new generation, then when it comes to ask senior leaders to dedicate half an hour of their time to discuss with the new generations, then they all shade away. That sounds a bit hypocritical. Then we should really think about that and look at each other and say, okay, do we really want to integrate the new generations, or is it just blah, 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 and then when it comes that we have to dedicate 1 hour of our time to discuss with the new generation? And when we speak about new generation, we're not speaking about toddlers, we speak about university graduate students, 24, 25, 30 sometimes. So I think this is a very important feedback, and we really should try to think about how to actually push the senior leaders to say, you know what, you really should do it because it's for the community and it's actually going to look good for you in a sort of way.
So there's a lot of strategic communication in all of this, and you started reflecting a little bit of what we have been trying to achieve on this conference. The approach on the conference has been somewhat different from the previous ones, seeking broader dialogue, and we are moving forward. So Christian, did we succeed? Where are we?
Again, coming back to the 3 Gs, I think generation we've talked about, to gender, we had 40% female, which is already progress. We are not yet there, but I think we are moving in the right direction. But let me focus a bit on geographics. We've had 45 countries represented, and we had also live streamed all the panels, so we had more than 2,000 connections. So that is definitely encouraging. The main goal, of course, here was to connect the space community with the non-space community, meaning decision makers that are not really coming from the space era. Did we achieve this? I think partially we did. We had representatives of organizations that are totally outside the normal space community as we know them. We had the UN represented, we had fossil fuel companies represented, so I think that is good. We also wanted to have the political leaders here. We wanted to have politicians here. We wanted to have ministers, members of parliament here. I think we have only partially succeeded that. We've had an outstanding speech at the opening by the Norwegian minister. We had positive feedback from 2 other ministers who had last minutes to cancel, which always happens and can happen. That's no deal. But I mean, just the sheer number of invitations which we have done. We've sent out more than 200 invitations to members of parliaments and ministers. And if you look today, what did we have? We had one minister from Norway. We had some 5 members of parliaments here. I think we need to do better in this. And we need to ask ourselves, why are these political decision makers not jumping off this on such a conference? Also, it is a topic that is, I think, very high on the agenda. The way to really maybe engage the general public is through, as we see it, different type of ambassadors, because it is also one of our goals really to reach out to the general public and tell the story that space can bring something to help these problems on Earth. First is media. 5% of all the registrants here at the conference were media representatives, free of charge. We in the IEF, we always put a big emphasis on having media representatives engaged in our conferences to ease and maybe close the gap, the understanding. Because it's one thing that we are giving out a press conference to the general media. It's another thing to invite media to come to these conferences and listen firsthand. And then they had maybe, and for sure they will have a better understanding and help us to reach out.
So we're drawing towards the end here. I want to address briefly now, we're talking how to go forward with the results because there is a lot of content in what we've been doing. We're talking about COP28. Short from Christian and then Jim, what are we going to do?
Well, the IEF has for the first time embarked on this topic, Space for Climate Change, and I can tell you it will not be the last one. I think we have all seen that there is a demand and we will follow this. Already at the IEC in Baku in October, we will follow up this topic. Christian, you have been selected for a highlight lecture there to report on the results of this conference. There will be other fora within the Congress that focus on this topic. We've applied at the GEO meeting, that is at the beginning of November, for a plenary, and we hope we'll get that in order to also bring the message from Gloc over there. And we are in contact with the UAE in order to see how we can bring the results of Gloc 2023 into COP28 in Dubai in December. So there is a lot that is going to come, and Gloc was the first of this kind of conference, but I can already now say it will not be the last.
All right.
All right.
All right, Jim. Jim, please, some rapid fire.
Okay, what we're going to do is we'll leave the conference, we're going to organize our thoughts, we'll come up with our results and come up with our actions. Then the intent is to socialize that with the different agencies that we all work with. And then the feedback will be in about 18 months when we sit down and go over it one more time in Milan and say, what have we done? Have we achieved any lasting change in what we're doing? And so the intent is not to just create a bunch of action items that go into the ether, but actually that we all go back to our home institutions, take these messages, and try to make the change, and then come back and see how we've done. So the point is we want a closed system. We want to create the actions, the results, share that, and make an action out of it that we can all be proud of.
But we have to commit to go fast also. I mean, we do need to have some milestones, but at the same time, time is running, and it's time is running for us as well. So we're approaching the very final round. We've been discussing a lot of issues in terms of the gaps, the tools, and the needs that we have, the next generation, how they will react, resilience, adaptation, different models, new tools, and also the anxiety versus the optimism that we see. There's a big span here. So I challenge you now, 30 seconds each. Who want to start?
Shall I start?
Yes, and we go this direction.
I had 10 seconds. I think one of the most important was end users tailor data, which is something else you mentioned, like the fact that local communities, they cannot use the data as they are, and we should think about them, because data is not the end, it's just a mean to arrive to another goal.
From what I've witnessed, I think I can understand that one of the challenges is being active rather than reactive to climate emergencies. And I also think that it's difficult to convince politicians when you have evolving data versus concrete data. So I think that those are the challenges that I've taken away from this.
Excellent.
Stand in the way.
Final words.
Final word, I would just repeat what I've heard from one of the speakers earlier today, and that I liked very much, and it may be a very straightforward message, also easy understandable for the media, and that is space will not save the climate, but climate we will not be able to save without space.
Ole Morten.
Yes, I'm optimistic after this conference, and I hope this is starting something which can go on in the future. I think we are about to get into an area where we really can predict things in the future, and I think that also will make it easier for us to communicate things to the general public and to decision makers.
Excellent. Barbara, please.
Yeah, I guess what I would hope is that we'd all kind of walk away with a personal commitment to carry forward some of the messages that we've heard, and then with action. Because if you are going to deliver, if we are going to deliver something to the Conference of the Parties, it's got to come up through our national governments, and somehow they got to get the message that this is important.
Final words.
Final words? Measure globally, implement locally. That's what I've learned.
Thank you. And like Barbara says, personal commitment, we have to be there.
Yeah.
So I want everyone to join me in an applause for this great panel.